I would love to now introduce Deborah. So our guest today is Deborah Carver, and I'm really excited to have Deborah here. I'm a big fan. Deborah is an independent consultant and publisher of The Content Technologist, which is a resource for content professionals working in the age of algorithms. And if you're not already subscribed to Deborah's newsletter, I would urge you, if you do nothing else today, go and subscribe. It's there's a lot of really good newsletters coming out of the content community at the moment, but I think Deborah, if I had a desert island newsletter, Deborah is the one that I would keep if I had to unsubscribe to all the others. And she actually puts it out every week, which is just kind of amazing to those of us who struggle to put out a newsletter every 3 months or so. So Deborah spent the first portion of her career working in traditional publishing and then transitioned to working on SEO and digital strategy full-time in 2013. Deborah's focused on organic content performance, and she helps clients navigate what makes good content findable, usable, informative, and delightful. And what I really love about Deborah's work is her kind of unshakable confidence that good content is what is going to win out in the end over all the algorithms. And it's just a matter of understanding a bit about what makes those algorithms work, that allows us to write our content in a way that I guess is good not just for humans, but also works for the algorithms. So that's what Deborah's going to talk about today, so she's going to talk about tackling the knowledge graph and structuring content for an AI world. We will have time for questions. Feel free to type questions in the chat as we go, and we'll get back to them at the end. But for now, I would love to hand over to Deborah.
All right, excellent. And actually, I've changed the title slightly because I realized that tackling was a sports metaphor and I didn't have any other. So we're either fostering or cultivating the knowledge graph today, because there's a garden metaphor that comes out too, which is not great for me because I'm not a gardener either. Like I'm not in sports, I'm not a gardener, but there's some high level metaphors. So if you're going too far into the cultivation, just or if there's gardening questions you have, I can't answer those, but I can answer questions about the knowledge graph. And as Angus said, I started working in book publishing. I've worked in pretty much all kinds of traditional publishing and switched to digital strategy a little more than a decade ago. And I draw from both industries and my experiences in both industries. And I've also been working on content SEO for over 10 years now, and things like natural language processing, knowledge graphs. I had the privilege to work at a really groundbreaking agency here in Minneapolis, and then another agency following that, where I just learned a lot on my own, and we were very responsible for our results, and we were doing a lot of experimenting with content and growing and building. And I saw how these structures, which were very confusing at the time for me, I've been dealing with them for about 10 years now. So I'm much more comfortable, and I've done a lot of this type of work for lots of different industries, mostly B2B, but there's been a lot in there. And just a little bit, content technologist. This QR code will get you to the newsletter.
I think you need to share your slides, Deborah.
Oh, I'm not sharing my slides. Oh,
that's
my goodness.
Right.
Oh,
I was wondering whether that was just a
share.
general intro, but yeah,
Whoops.
That's okay.
Whoops. All right, so we're fostering. There we go. There's the garden. There's me. There's the QR code. So yeah, the weekly newsletter is sent on Thursdays, or it probably gets to Australia on Friday, because I usually send it late my Thursday. And yeah, tomorrow's newsletter is going to be about grounding your data. So something completely different from this presentation. There's also a monthly if weekly is too often for you. And I will say that I'll plug this again at the end, but I have a series of 4 courses that I'm launching this year. Finishing up the second this week. It's supposed to launch on Sunday. It will kind of. Everything's pretty much all going. But yeah, I launched an audience research course back in March. this one's about structure and SEO. In September, there's a course launching about measurement, and then finally wrapping that all together on impactful content strategy, which is basically using everything from the first 3 courses to make a difference. So these are available individually or as what I call the expansion pack in pre-order. So check them out. All right, that's the end of the plug. We will get into the agenda. What we're going to do is we're going to define some terms. And we're talking about an area that has been around in knowledge graphs and natural language processing, have been in computing and in wide use for a long time. But it's really only now that we're starting to see, especially with generative AI, starting to see how what you put into the knowledge graph, how that comes out. And generative AI has helped me a lot personally in just understanding like, oh, that's how these things that I've been working for and creating content for, that's how they read and understand this content. We're going to talk about natural language processing and search engines. Then we're going to look at our own knowledge graphs, because our knowledge graphs are every brand, every company has a knowledge graph. Some people have knowledge graphs. So we'll evaluate that in 3 quick ways, and then we'll do some cultivating, pruning, and shaping suggestions. So, and forgive me if you have heard about structured versus unstructured content. It's again not a new concept, but there's wide levels of familiarity with this. So I'm just going to start from the beginning, which starts with my experience as an English major and in publishing, which is that in poetry, forms like the villanelle, the sonnet, and the ballad, they have dictated structure. This is structured content. There are ways that you can identify that something is a ballad by its rhyme scheme, by the way that the scansion and meter go. So poetry is structured content, even blank verse. I would say comics are structured content. My husband is a cartoonist, so comics are very near and dear to my heart. Comics are divided into squares called panels, and these panels are part of the structured content, and they indicate also that you are looking at sequential art, and that there is some kind of connection between panel 1 and panel 2. And we could say that structure is essential to artful content, but then we wouldn't know how to treat Finnegan's Wake, which if any of you are literature scholars, Finnegan's Wake is James Joyce's notoriously dense final work, which is kind of just a sentence, and he makes up a ton of words. So also very artful, very little structure. Then we'll get to you may have learned about post-structuralism at some point in your university education. Also, it's not directly relevant, except that it's kind of an ideological critique of the way meaning talks to machines, but also it doesn't hurt. Like, I found that knowing post-structuralism and understanding post-structuralism doesn't hurt, because it kind of helps you decouple things. It helps you understand the difference between form and content. I love this, the Barth's graph. I just found this again and was like, oh, that looks just like a programming flow. But post-structuralism, we're going back to structure, because books have structure. We've got tables of contents, footnotes, chapters, indices. Newspapers have structure. Obviously, we've got our headlines, our bylines, indexes, things like TV schedules, columns, cut lines, the masthead. Newspapers have lots of structure. And in print, structure helps keep things on the page. It helps keep things organized, and it makes it physically able to fit on a page that is being printed, and making sure that we're not bleeding into the center and to the margins. Whereas with digital content, as we know, if we're using a content management system, digital content has structure. Kind of. It's not dictated the same as in books and newspapers, where there are established style guides and established standards. We're still not quite there with digital content, but there is structure to it. As you know, we all use content management systems. And structured content is just any content that is formatted, separated into components to help computers and audiences understand the context, meaning, and purpose of the work. So having a headline in a content management system and a separate field for the body text, that is structured content. There are separate fields, they're labeled differently. If you're content designers, I'm sure know this very well. But structured content is those formatted, separated components, and they can come in a lot of different levels. Structured content are also elements added to text and websites that signal hierarchy, connection, and authority to search engines, social networks, databases, apps, versus unstructured content, which is any kind of digital content without any labels or formatting, or just general. My example, there's Finnegan's Wake, and also if you're familiar with the original On the Road by Jack Kerouac, which was just like a scroll on a typewriter and he taped all the pieces together, or just one never-ending string. That's unstructured content, but there are kind of different levels of content structure that we encounter specifically on the web. Highly structured content is going to be websites with content filtering, some of your more enterprise websites, most apps, databases, IMDb, Wikipedia, libraries, museums, streaming services. Programmatic content is highly structured. Also, like document retrieval services like ResearchGate. These are all very structured. There's a lot of different elements, and there's a lot happening on the back end with the program to understand what each of those elements mean and how they relate to each other. Then we get to semi-structured content, which is most of the content on the internet. Most websites and blogs are going to have, like I said, a heading, a body, maybe an author, but most of the content in a blog is going to be pretty unstructured. Tweets are unstructured content. Forums, Reddit, that's semi-structured. There's, the folders and the topics and the authors, but also, each post is long and not necessarily structured. Email newsletters, kind of a giant lump of content when it's actually read by a computer. The HTML files and plain text files just kind of come as one big lump, as well as newish PDFs. Newish PDFs tend to have some structure in them. Versus minimally structured content, which is going to be photos, videos, any kind of conversational content, live stream, podcast transcripts, any kind of older PDFs that are just straight up graphics, pretty much, scans of books, messaging, chat, most personal content. This presentation, most Office documents, like there's some structure in them, but they're not super structured in the way that very well structured content is. So, and in digital content, what structure means as far as we content designers and content strategists are concerned, digital content structure consists of a consistent, considered informational hierarchy, navigational labels and menus, folders and subdirectories, headings, categories and tags being a kind of a big one, image and file labeling, schema markup, and filling out all the fields in the CMS, or at least knowing what they do. Whether or not you're actually filling in every single one every time, at least know why you are or you aren't. These are all the elements that give content structure and make it more readable to search engines and social networks. And what search engines and social networks are reading about digital content aren't that it'll see that you have a heading or that you have a folder, but with the types of systems that we've been using for the past 10 years, it's those labels on the folder, the words that you use in the folders, in the headings, in the categories and tags, those are what are meaningful about the structure that you're creating. So it's about not only that you have a heading, but that the heading has language in it that contributes to or signals to a search engine or social network that you know what you're talking about. So we'll talk a lot more about this as far as we go for knowledge graphs. But when we're talking about structured content, we're just talking about all those little components and elements that make up the whole. And how do search engines and social networks read unstructured content? Through natural language processing. And natural language processing is I've learned about natural language processing 10 years ago, and I'm still astounded that computers are able to read and process writing and speech, which mimics kind of how humans think of language. It is a system that natural language processing ingests a bunch of content and comes back out with search results, or social media search results, or even social networks filter everything and have trust and safety protocols built in to naturally process that language and filter. And it's funny, I do say naturally. There's so many things in my role in where it's like organic and natural, and I'm just like, this is all computational, it's all computers, but it's kind of natural, because neural networks and natural language processing systems are named after human brains, but they are not the same as human brains. And I think it's very important to remember, now that we're a bit out of the AI glow, we all are seeing that, yes, there are clearly some errors and drawbacks into these amazing new technologies. And it is important to remember that they are not the same as the human brain, but computers read based on statistical likelihood, based on formulas like TF-IDF, which it's an old language processing formula from like the 70s that looks at the amount of words in one small piece of text compared to a large body, and looking at the frequency of not only how often one word is used, but how often it's used in a body of documents. Computers also read with natural language processing based on similarity to other existing authoritative content, consistency with existing consensus content or what has already been ranking, and context and memory. The important thing to remember about knowledge graphs and natural language processing as it feeds into knowledge graphs is that once the computer has read your content and decided that, yes, you have authority in some area, it tends to remember. And so that's when you get highly ranked either keywords or highly ranked pages, very visible pages in search, because you have been able to prove to, it's gonna be Google. Oh, it's gonna be Google for a long time, but hopefully some other competitors soon as well. But you're able to prove to Google that your content is similar enough, even though it wasn't heavily structured, is similar enough to the other existing authoritative content that it also deserves to rank. And then once it's kind of up there and has been in the database for a while, you gain what's called authority or equity. And what the natural language processing does is it reads your site, it scans all the structure, it looks at the words in your site, and it connects those words to existing what are called entities. So when I'm talking about the knowledge graph, I'm talking about the layer of the source of truth that search engines like Google put over the search results to ensure that that the results are high quality. AI tools also work with knowledge graphs, and as well as there are internal technologies, you can build a knowledge graph for your own company. But what happens in a knowledge graph is that your content is processed with NLP, natural language processing, and it connects the words that you use with existing entities or groups of words that already exist. And what I think about it, I'm not sure if you had this in Australia, but the $20,000 period or a pyramid or taboo, where you're talking about a concept and you're using all the words except the actual word for that concept. And that's kind of what an entity is. It is all of the words that surround a concept. We'll talk about that in a second. But entities are made up of all of your language, all the language of your competitors, the language of authoritative and consensus sources. So Wikipedia and Wikipedia and everything else that's authoritative out there. All the search terms that your audience use to find your website, existing known entities, so proper names, products, applicable synonyms, misspellings, all of that connects to entities. And the storage of those patterns of all that connected text, images, other inputs related to a subject, related to a body of content, that is called a knowledge graph. So there's a little, it's a networked way of thinking about content where it creates a knowledge graph is a source of truth that is stored in the patterns, previous patterns of connected text, images, and understanding of content. Knowledge graphs move more slowly than search engines, although that is, or not search engines, than social networks. Social networks tend to work in real time. Knowledge graphs to preserve information quality. As we know, information on the internet is highly malleable. Knowledge graphs are really defined slowly and with more inputs than ephemeral online content. It's not all that much different than an old-fashioned library card catalog where authors, titles, subjects, and topics are connected. Except in the case of a knowledge graph, it's not just, it can contain exponentially more data, exponentially more drawers that have, instead of limiting your new book that was just published to one topic or a few different subjects, it can kind of be every single iteration of the subject that that book would be about if in a card catalog. It's knowledge graphs take info about the author, info about the brand or website that it's coming from, and info about the subjects that you're covering and how they relate to other subjects online, and kind of just make this source of truth that is referenced every time we use a search engine. Knowledge graphs represent what computers remember about your brand. And I know I say computers really broadly, and if anyone here is an engineer, it's probably like, oh no, that's way too broad. But it's just they represent what the internet or internal servers remember about your brand. So entities represented by words in context connect via the computer's memory of previously linked entities. Most knowledge graphs are very text dependent. Because of natural language processing, like I said, 10 years old, it can process text very well. It's just starting to figure out images. As you know, using CAPTCHA, the larger sources of truth still don't really know what a boat or a bicycle is in an image, but with words, we have a pretty solid understanding of what different entities and semantic signals are, what these signals are, how they're linking to each other. Knowledge graphs can also be used to kind of represent, if you want to think about, this is one that represents the Lord of the Rings. There's definitely not, connected knowledge graphs out there that represent lots like the Marvel Cinematic Universe and a lot of these multiverse ideas. The knowledge graph is kind of like a multiverse of words that is seen as a source of truth. So there's still a lot more. A knowledge graph is a database that stores and recalls large amounts of facts and semantically and topically related data in which the entities, which are also nodes or nouns, in which they are defined in their semantic relationship to each other. So we are talking about semantics and the way that words are used in relationship to each other. And commonly, any collection of factual data about a network used for information storage and retrieval. This is like a more official definition of a knowledge graph. This idea of knowledge graphs has been around, of connected text and entities in kind of in these little word clouds almost. That's been around for a while. The actual term knowledge graph, Google popularized it in 2012 and it's associated with Google, but now with AI and RAG, retrieval augmented generation, knowledge graphs are becoming more widely known as a concept. It's definitely, it's one of those terms in computing where depending on who you ask, it has a different meaning, but it is just typically any collection of data that is considered fact in a network that is used for storage and retrieval. It applies hierarchy and categorizing information and relationships. And each entity or node is an area in a knowledge graph that represents a person, a place, a thing, idea, concept, brand. Any noun is pretty much an entity. And so here's the visualization. I'll check the chat really quick. All right. All right. So here we go. That's working. This is just kind of a knowledge graph, an example of a knowledge graph. So say you are looking for the name of a famous actor. In the knowledge graph about that famous actor, you might find the date of birth, city of residence, their most famous films, and entrepreneurial side projects. So I'm thinking of George Clooney here. He's got like, he's born, this is where he lives in Los Angeles. Here's his famous films, and he does Nespresso and tequila. So all those things are connected to his knowledge graph. Then kind of in the next level out, we get some different inputs and that starts connecting to other entities. So on the date of birth, what other famous historical events happened on that day? What other people were born in that day? Who are the actors' birthday buddies? And the city of residence, if it's Los Angeles, the Los Angeles entity is going to contain a lot of different things like great restaurants or museums, anything that's in Los Angeles. And those are going to connect out to things like, other artists in those museums and the museum's events and different, the events scheduled on the date of birth for that year. And this is just how the model works in the background. We're never going to see this on the end when Googling this famous actor, but this is just kind of picturing the idea of the semantic model working in the background and how it's connecting all these details. So yeah, you get the most famous films, other people, then 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, 6 degrees of, it is kind of 6 degrees of separation, but instead of just with people, it's with everything. And so it's just a net. It's a web or an internet. They came up with that analogy a long time ago. So yeah, that's my a rough visualization of a knowledge graph. I'm working hard on getting like a 3D one, but it's also little hard to grok. I'm not an animator. So again, knowledge graphs describe not only what's in these entities, but how these entities are connected to each other. So each line in that knowledge graph also just represents a relationship, and that relationship will be described semantically and read by natural language processing, so that there is, and when that's stored, that becomes kind of a stable source of truth. So I'll stop here briefly and just ask if there are any questions about what knowledge graphs are, or this is like, I think the third or fourth time I've explained this. So I want to make sure that if we're kind of aligned in our understanding that the knowledge graph is like this thing that hovers above search results that connects words. Does that make sense?
So Deborah, yeah, Kate's made a note of your knowledge graph is a multiverse of words, which I think obviously resonated with people. I also love the 6 degrees of separation, but for everything. I think that's definitely the way I'm going to explain knowledge graphs from now on.
Yeah.
So we have a couple of questions. Do you want to take questions as you go, or do you want to
I'll
come
take a
back at
couple
the
questions
end?
now. Yeah.
But yeah, Swapnil had just wanted to know if you could expand a bit more on what you mean by knowledge graphs moving more slowly.
Oh, yes. So this is something that we really saw so the way search engines specifically don't move as quickly. They don't process information and surface results as quickly as social networks. It's something that we saw, especially during COVID, when you would Google something, and um, Google actually made editorial decisions to highlight some of that knowledge in the knowledge graph just so it could maintain a stable source of truth. So what I'm not sure how they did this. Like I think in the beginning they just like pulled websites and made it completely editorially. But when you have a topic that is controversial, or there are a lot of different opinions about a topic, there is some kind of holding period that Google and search engines will put new content in until until there's some facts or some corroboration. Um, it makes a more stable source of truth, and it doesn't get edited. Not edited even, but it just doesn't change as often as, say, looking for new information on TikTok, which is just going to send you to the most recent thing, unless like the most recent thing that's also the most popular. So that's kind of what I mean by that. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
Cool.
fantastic. Yeah, and there's also a question from Kate. So if knowledge graphs are text dependent, does that include alt text? So is
Yes.
alternate text that we provide for accessibility, is that helping knowledge graphs as
Yes.
well as obviously helping
Yes.
vision impaired people?
Yes. And it's one of those back in the day when they used to say optimize your alt text for SEO, which is don't optimize your alt text for SEO, optimize your alt text for accessibility, and the semantic gain will follow.
Yeah.
Is how I think about that one. We use like it's the alt text is a part of it, although if you with all things in Google, if you try too hard to relate to the previous, to stuff keywords in there to relate to another entity, or to relate to a specific entity that has the keywords that you want, if you try too hard, you will get that will get noticed algorithmically, and that kind of authority will be pushed away, versus if you are doing a good job at writing accurate alt text for the job that it is supposed to do, which is describe images for people who are visually impaired. Great, that's awesome. It is, yeah, the accessibility part is, it's just, people try to hack that, and it's not.
Yeah,
don't hack things.
bad for all sorts of reasons. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Great. That's our
Awesome.
question so far. Thanks, Deborah.
All right. So we're going to talk about 3 quick ways to evaluate topical authority, because, all right, so every brand has a knowledge graph. Every website has a knowledge graph or a knowledge graph entry. The algorithms know some things about your website already today. And sometimes when this is actually more of a thing with marketers, less than content strategists. But people will come into a new role and they'll say, oh my gosh, everything is messed up. We have nothing. We have absolutely nothing. And in reality, it's like, no, you've had a website for a while. You have equity. You actually have the seeds of something. You don't necessarily have it organized or guided in a way where you can make sense of that knowledge graph. But you do have something. You have the seeds of it, because almost all websites have authority of some sort on some topics. Your brand is already a part of existing knowledge graphs. Unless you are just starting today, putting a website on the internet, in which case you are starting fresh, and good for you. I'm so excited for you, actually. But your branded knowledge graph probably already exists. If you have a public profile, you might have a personal knowledge graph as well. So the number one thing you can do to find out what's in your knowledge graph, because it helps, especially with branding, to understand, okay, well, what do the computers know and think about me? So I always just go direct to the source and ask all the chatbots about my brand, and it will tell me. Um, and it will tell me some things, and then you'll see if it ever hallucinates. That is definitely that will show up as well. But just asking all the chatbots, what is this brand? I've never heard of it before. Because what you want to do is we're going to be getting to a point very soon where once the technology gets better, the AI overviews that Google is doing are not great, but it will get better. Well, people will start asking OpenAI directly about your brand and assuming, or asking Google directly about your brand and assuming that the AI generated answer is true. So it's just about looking and recognizing what the entity knows, or what the knowledge graph knows, and the kind of the words that it's using. It's never going to use your exact brand language. It is going to, because it's trained to use synonyms, so it doesn't, so there's no plagiarism. So it's not going to use your exact brand language, but it is going to see it to show you, okay, this is what it knows about me. These are the topics it associates with me and with my brand. So easiest way to do things, ask the chatbots. Number two is to own your data. And I'll be talking about this, my newsletter tomorrow that goes out, talking about grounding your data and things that in what you know. And this is a huge, huge, this is one of my big items, is especially as content people, our metrics, the metrics applied to content performance are either they can be difficult for us to grasp, or we don't always have direct access to them. So I encourage everyone to get access to your Google Search Console. If you've never been in Google Search Console before, it tells you exactly how you are showing up in the Google search engine, so you can manage that presence if you have technical errors on your site or whatever, but it also shows you what keywords and topics you show up for most often. So checking Google Search Console to understand how algorithms are reading and prioritizing your content. Basically, you want to go into performance and filter out any query containing your brand, because we should be ranking for our brand name queries, but if you do this, it will tell you everything that is non-branded that you are showing up for in search results. And those top pages, those high performance queries and pages that it leaves after it's filtered out your brand, those are the topics where you have existing authority. And those are the areas where your website is already well known by Google. I actually wrote about this a little bit last week. I know there are certain areas I know I have authority on in Google, like it's Netflix KPI. And actually this one, asking third-party software is the other way you can do it. This is Mangools, which is my keyword research tool. But tools like Mangools, SEMrush, RFs, and SparkToro can show you where your content that you've already created has high topical authority. How are you showing up? I have some embarrassing keywords in there because I rank for this term butt rock, in which I wrote an article. I wrote a piece on a genre of music and how I would go about ranking for it. And the genre is called butt rock. And I did it as a joke. And now I actually rank for the head term, which I'm just like, this isn't what it's about, but sure, I guess I rank for the head term now. So yeah, my search authority is kind of embarrassing, but I know I rank for butt rock, Netflix KPIs, and editing AI content. And so those are the things that I know that I can build on. And actually, when I published something this week about AI content, Google picked that up immediately because I have an established reputation and authority for writing about topics around editing AI content and being, having some expertise in that area. And also if you are an SEO or if you have SEO people on your team, you don't even have to look this up. I bet you they can tell you immediately all the areas and all the keywords that you're ranking for that are your highest value non-branded keywords. And what you want to do after looking, talking to them is like grouping those into topics and thinking of, okay, if I were a word cloud in the word universe, like which entities would these words sit with? If I were a knowledge graph. So adding structure to your content can prune and direct that knowledge graph. So you're not just left at the hands of OpenAI to decide what your website is about. You can take a little bit of control over how the robots, how search engines, and how people are reading your website. Knowledge graphs can grow and change over time based on the structure of your website, based on what crawlers perceive. It takes, if you've ever worked in SEO, and this is what I talk about with it's slower, it can take 6 to 8 months to make major changes in SEO, especially if you've done a lot of content work. It can take it's quicker than it used to be, but it can take a very long time. But that's why it's this kind of pruning your knowledge graph is a long-term effort. It's like keeping a garden keeping your garden healthy and contained and still wild and thriving. Your branded knowledge graph is, this is another way of looking at it. It's less word cloudy, but it's a little easier. You're going to start by structuring, okay, you have a brand name, you have product names, you might have customer service content. You also might have notable people, your CEO, your executives. Then you kind of build on that and you have existing topical authority. Then there might be some other content on your site that is primarily for audience engagement, like if you have a news feed of all your recent content. New products, they can be added onto that knowledge graph. You might want to build some new topical authority based on that existing search. So again, taking a topic that you have already done a good job with and pivoting it and moving towards a different topic that is semantically related, but not exactly the same. Then once you have kind of an established knowledge graph, you could always create some new topical expertise. You could invent, a term or coin something that is greenfields, and that becomes attached to your knowledge graph. And then you can do some experiments that may or may not attach to your knowledge graph as well. I have a bit of an aspirational knowledge graph. This is kind of where I'm at with these. Yeah, I said GA4 engagement, Netflix KPIs, AI content. My knowledge graph also has, LinkedIn posts, podcasts that I've been on, and the topics that I want to rank for, which are my aspiration as in the dark purple. And then we've got some pink, these are just also other nice things. I would love to be linked to these people, to all of this in a larger knowledge graph. So when I think about pruning my brand for the knowledge graph, I have specific topics that I would like to show up for. And it's not about mapping those to keywords, but it's about mapping that to an editorial or a topical strategy that kind of builds that whole entity. It is not so literal as a lot of SEO practices in the past indicate. It is a lot more about the words that you use naturally to talk about a subject that other people also use to talk about it. And it's a lot easier to tend to your knowledge graph when you consider the whole environment. Again, it's thinking about the long game, thinking about what you want your website and your brand to be known for. That's what's in your knowledge graph. Anything that's publicly available online, your social media content, also all of that can contribute to your knowledge graph as long as it's public and crawlable. That's kind of more what you're going to see in the knowledge graph, is that larger public content. Also, while we all have really great brands, knowledge graphs are mostly words right now. So you could have a really amazing visual style guide, and it's possible that a search engine sees that. But as far as differentiating in search results, different brands with visuals, from what I have seen, we are not there yet. So it is and when knowledge graphs include YouTube content, they're transcribing the whole thing and then adding the text in, and not necessarily looking at the visuals. So visual brand cohesion, really important for people, not so important for computers right now. Computers are really looking for textual authority, building semantic authority, less with the visuals. But yeah, that's our knowledge graph, the famous actor knowledge graph, just kind of all the different ways that you can spider out to get to a topic and then get to the different types of separation. Oops, I already did that one. So yeah, that is the end of the presentation about knowledge graphs. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, and I'm happy to take questions if you have any further questions. And I can actually, I'm gonna turn up my chat now. Where is,
Amazing.
yeah. So yeah, that QR code will get you to the newsletter. But yeah, in the course that I'm kind of working on now and finishing up now, we're talking about very specific ways to shape and prune that knowledge graph, to market your content so that it can be naturally or organically picked up, so you don't have to then pay for advertising on keywords. So that's the idea behind knowledge graph thinking. But it is also about making good, authentic content and not trying enough. Like you try to manage a book before it's published, you are publishing professionally technically, but not trying so hard that it feels spammy. There is a nice middle ground where the knowledge graph exists, where you understand that, you're not publishing in a vacuum, but also you're not trying so hard that it looks spammy. But yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Deborah.
Well,
There's
thank
just
you.
so much there. I have so many questions, but we probably have about five minutes for questions. And Kate has a hand up, so I'll pass over to Kate if you'd like to ask your question, Kate.
Thank you, Angus, and thank you, Deborah. That was excellent. I've been dipping my toe in this field for several years, but never had the time or the capacity to do it, which is so. Angus and Weave, thanks for scheduling this. Perfect. Question about localized content. So how much, because a lot of the stuff I've worked in the States, the UK,
Yes.
and Australia, all English speaking, but with localized content for the project I've been doing. How does that rate with all of this?
Yes. Your content will appear with your local vernacular. So like semantically in each area, if you're searching on Google Australia, it's going to default to the Australian vernacular. Is even with well, I don't know what you call it in Australia, but in America, a big giant rectangle cake is called a sheet cake, and in the UK it's called a tray bake. And so that's an example I think of where it's like, okay, if you're using sheet cake, that is going to indicate that you are an American, and if you're using tray bake, that's British. So it can, those local I don't know, just local dialects, local that signals where you are, I guess, is how I'm trying to explain it.
Look,
yeah.
we have a weird combination of both, Deborah. So
okay.
look up chips in Australia. What chips refer to in Australia? Your mind will be blown.
All right.
Yeah, we've talked. Yeah. So Google quite possibly gets a bit confused with Australians.
Google. I mean, so in Minnesota we have Prince the musician, and but if there's ever news about one of the princes, Prince Harry or Prince William in England, it gets confused a little bit. So I get that. Yeah.
I thought if when Apple develops their programming language Swift, they probably would call it something else if they in the age of Taylor Swift, where she just dominates the logic, the knowledge graph so much.
Oh my gosh. Everyone's knowledge graph is Taylor Swift, pretty much. Yeah. Or everyone's algorithm. Yeah.
Any other, thanks for the question, Kate. Any other questions for Deborah before we move over to announcements?
I have a follow-up, if I can cheekily ask.
Yeah, of course.
So if the knowledge graph, if you're just using that like a sheet bake and a tray bake. So they're just facets in a taxonomy, right? So how does the taxonomy then relate to the knowledge graph, or is Google ignoring the taxonomy and just looking at what words that are published?
Google doesn't see the official, isn't going to process the official taxonomy, but what it is going to do is see that you are using those words consistently over and over again and say, okay, that is what they are talking about. So it's the intention to use the words in your taxonomy, and putting them in prominent places, like in your navigation and in your headings, as well as a little bit behind the scenes, although that doesn't count as much. That's more for you, your categories and your tags. But it's about, grouping that and structuring that in your website in the same areas together. So if that makes sense.
Thanks so much, Deborah. Deborah, if you don't mind sticking around for a bit longer,
oh, that's totally
we
fine.
might run through our announcements and then come back and have some more questions at the end. Lenny, did you have a question or an announcement? Oh, you need to take yourself off.
Sorry. Thanks, Angus. An announcement. If we can wait. If there's any more questions, I can wait a minute.
Yeah. No, that's fine. We'll do the announcements because I know some people have to leave at 10. So we'll do the announcements and then come back to questions. So you've got an announcement. I know Swapnil has one as well. So yeah, go for it, Lenny.
Thank you. And thanks, Deborah. That was absolutely brilliant, very timely, and all brilliant information to soak in and try and make sense of. Hi, everyone. I'm Lenny. I run a digital content strategy and design agency called Content Arc in Melbourne. We're looking for a content designer. I put some information quickly in the chat there. It's a fixed-term contract from now until the end of the year, 4 or 5 days a week. We're looking for somebody with excellent plain language writing skills. That's at the heart of what this particular task is. Rewriting complex source material to a new IA and new content types. Working knowledge of the Australian government style manual is government work. We're based in Melbourne, but location flexible. So just a quickie, expressions of interest to me, Lenny at contentarc.com.au, preferably with a LinkedIn link. Thank you.
Fabulous. And Lenny, Content Arc would be an amazing agency to work for. So yeah, definitely encourage you to.
We, Angus, you know, one day.
We're not. we don't have any jobs growing at the moment, unfortunately. So yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Lenny. Swapnil had an announcement about Write the Docs. Do you want to come off mute, Swapnil?
Yeah, thanks, Angus. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Deborah, for the talk too. I had to get through 2 cups of heavy coffee just to digest all that first thing in the morning. But yeah, thank you. So just a quick announcement, Write the Docs Australia. It's a community conference which is taking place in Melbourne this year on the 28th and 29th of November. We've got our call for proposals open at the moment until the end of August. So it's a conference around, technical content, but it could be any form. Like we get a mix of tech writers, programmers, UX designers, content designers talking about their experiences and knowledge about everything content, everything documentation. So I'm going to post some links in call for proposals out until end of August, and we've also got our tickets. And I'm also going to put in a link to the YouTube channel so you can have a look at some of our previous talks from last few years. Everything's available for the last 7 years that we have been running this conference. So thank you again.
Brilliant. Thanks, Swapnil. Any other announcements, feel free to just pop them in the chat. I'll just run through a few of our own. So for our next meetup, we'll be back on the 25th of July. This one will be at 5 p.m. because our guest is coming to us from the UK, and it's going to be Rich Prowse from Content Design London. You'll really love Rich if you haven't come across him before. He's going to be talking about content design for how people think and act. So content design, I guess, knowing a bit about what actually happens in the real world, how people really think, how people really act. So he'll be fabulous. And then we have a couple more speakers lined up for the months after that. We have met our friend Matt Fenwick from True North Content, based in Canberra, talking to us in August. And then we're really excited to have Keith Oak from the Queensland Government on the 26th of September. Keith is actually an AI engineer, so I think it's going to be a really great companion to Deborah's talk. He's going to be talking about it from the other perspective, but McGee's been working with, doing some work with the Queensland Government and had a conversation with Keith a couple of weeks ago and just found it so fascinating. And he has so many thoughts about what makes content work well for AI, that we asked him to come along, and he agreed. So he'll be our speaker in September. We do have a YouTube channel, and we're putting talks up as they as they happen. We will get to some of our past talks when we get around to it. We do have to get permission, obviously, from the people who did the talks to put them up. But yeah, at the moment we're just putting talks up as they happen. So please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. The Content Design London training, which we deliver in Australia or in this time zone on behalf of Content Design London. We have dates coming up for both the foundation and advanced courses. They're not officially announced yet, so the best thing to do if you're interested in either of those courses is just go to our website and sign up for our training updates, which we don't, like Deborah, we don't spam. We only send useful updates. So that's our announcements. If anyone else has an announcement, feel free to put them into the chat. For people who need to leave, thanks very much for being here. It's been great to have you along. See you next month. And yeah, a lot of great comments about the talk from Deborah. But if I can ask a question, Deborah. So one thing I've been very interested in, I don't know how much you know or how involved you are in the object-oriented UX kind of methodology that Sophia Prater has developed. Yeah. But there seems to be a real something that chimes between her approach and the idea of knowledge of entities in knowledge graphs. Yeah. And that's the idea of nouns as kind of foundational, because she talks about the idea of noun foraging and the idea of looking for your nouns and sort of working out what the things are in your domain or in your ecosystem, and sort of building everything from there. And from the way you've described knowledge graphs, they're working in kind of the same way. They're looking for the entities, are like the nouns, yes, they're concepts, they're things. So that there seems to be a real sort of, yeah, those two things sort of seem to jive pretty well. But I'm curious, because I think in the UX world, we tend to be very verb focused. So we tend to be, a lot of our thought is about tasks or journeys, things that people are trying to do. So where do verbs fit into knowledge graphs? How do those nouns, do knowledge graphs have a way of understanding the way that people actually act on these concepts? Or
I don't think it's that they will find the most frequently used verbs that attach to nouns. Yeah. Like that's going to be and attached to the concept. So it's more about the frequency of use. And yeah, you introduced me to Sophia. We've actually been talking and be doing the OOUX training this summer.
Awesome.
But it's very similar. The way that there are some differences. Because with knowledge graphs, it's just, it is really about just like frequency of use and the topics, but the way that it hinges on in searches, people search for nouns. So if people were searching for more verbs, that would matter more, but it tends to be the noun is the core or the head query. So, but verbs, it's more about like frequency. So yeah, with cake, I worked for cakes.com at one point. That's why I know a lot about cake keywords, but like bake and measure and make and frost, like those are also all going to be part of that entity just because they're commonly used words. So yeah. And but it doesn't, I would say just in general, the verbs are more for the end user, the audience, and the computer focuses more on the nouns. the computer model does anyway. Yeah.
Great. Awesome.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Deborah, or has everyone already run off and started typing your own brand into ChatGPT? Because I know that's what I'm going to be doing straight after we finish.
I have to do
what a
the new
genius
version. That was like
idea.
3 GBTs ago that I had mine.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right.
All right.
Well, let's leave it there then. But thank you so much for Deborah. Oh, the YouTube channel, I can share that. Again, I'll just put up the slide. I should have a QR code like Deborah up on this slide, but it's youtube.com/@wearecontentsd. I think YouTube's the only website that actually puts the @ symbol in URLs, which just seems weird to me, but that's what it is. But if you just search We Are Content Strategy and Design, you'll also find it. And the next event, yeah, absolutely. Next event is the 25th of July. So we'll be announcing it sort of straight after this finishes. So if you go to meetup.com, and again, just look for We Are Content Strategy and Design, you will find the event. You'll get notified of all our events. But yeah, thanks so much to everyone for being here. Thank you again, Deborah.
Thank you.
Just so much there to cogitate on. And yeah, enjoy your evening in Minneapolis.
Yes, thank
All
you.
right.
All right.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.